The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered fence posts of the Cartwright homestead, each broken rail telling a story of neglect that Martha had carried in her heart for 3 long years. She stood on her porch, calloused hands gripping a cup of bitter coffee, watching the wind dance through the gaps where her husband Thomas once strung wire with such careful precision. The prairie stretched endlessly beyond the damaged barrier, a sea of golden grass that whispered secrets she no longer cared to hear. At 42, Martha's face bore the lines of a woman who had forgotten how to smile. Her once bright auburn hair now pulled severely back beneath a faded bonnet that had seen better days. The blue dress she wore, though clean and mended with practiced skill, hung loose on a frame that had grown thin from meals forgotten and sorrows swallowed. Her green eyes, once sparkling with the joy of new love and frontier dreams, now held the distant look of someone who watched life pass by from behind glass windows that never opened. The sound of approaching hoofbeats broke through her morning reverie, and she squinted against the rising sun to see a lone rider approaching at an easy pace. He sat tall in his saddle, his silhouette cutting a confident figure against the vast sky, and something about the relaxed way he moved with his horse suggested a man comfortable in his own skin. As he drew nearer, she could make out the weathered leather of his chaps, the faded blue of his work shirt, and the easy smile that seemed to be his natural expression. "Morning, ma'am," he called out, touching the brim of his well-worn hat with a gesture that spoke of ingrained courtesy. "Name's Jake Sullivan. I heard in town you might be looking for someone to do some fence repair." His voice carried the warm drawl of a man raised under open skies, with an underlying note of genuine friendliness that made Martha's chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Martha set down her coffee cup with deliberate care, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed her skirt and stepped to the edge of the porch. "That would be correct, Mr. Sullivan, though I should warn you, it's more rebuilding than repairing at this point." Her voice came out sharper than she intended, the defensive tone that had become her armor against a world that seemed determined to disappoint her. Jake dismounted with fluid grace, his boots hitting the dusty ground with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the morning stillness. Up close, Martha could see he was perhaps 35, with crow's feet around his blue eyes that spoke of many days squinting into the sun, and hands that bore the honest calluses of hard work. His brown hair, streaked with early silver, curled slightly beneath his hat, and when he smiled, she noticed he was missing a tooth on the left side, a detail that somehow made him seem more human, more real. "Well, ma'am, I've rebuilt more fence than I care to count, and I've found that sometimes the best fences are the ones that get a second chance." His words seemed to carry a double meaning that made Martha's breath catch, though she quickly pushed such foolish thoughts aside. "Mind if I take a look at what we're dealing with?" Martha led Jake around the property boundaries with the mechanical precision of someone who had walked this route countless times, pointing out each section that needed attention with the same tone she might use to list grocery items. But Jake's presence seemed to change the very air around her, his easy commentary about the land and the work filling silences that had stretched unbroken for months. "Your husband knew what he was doing when he chose this spot," Jake observed, running his hand along a post that still stood straight and true despite years of weather. "Good drainage, protected from the worst winds, and look how that rise there breaks the force of storms coming from the north." He gestured toward a gentle hill that Martha had seen thousands of times but never really noticed, his words painting the familiar landscape with new appreciation. "Thomas was a practical man," Martha replied, her voice catching slightly on her late husband's name. "He said a homestead was only as good as its planning." She paused beside a section where the fence had been completely flattened, remembering the storm 3 winters ago that had begun its destruction while Thomas lay dying of fever in their bedroom. Jake knelt beside the damaged area, his experienced hands testing the soil and examining the fallen posts with the attention of a man who understood that good work required understanding the problem completely. "These posts are still sound underneath," he said, looking up at her with an encouraging smile. "Your Thomas built this to last. We can save most of the foundation work and just need to replace the rails and re-strengthen the wire." The way he said "your Thomas" with such natural respect made Martha's eyes well with unexpected tears, and she turned away quickly, pretending to examine a distant section of fence. It had been so long since anyone had spoken of her husband with such casual acknowledgement, as if his memory deserved to be honored rather than tiptoed around, or, worse, forgotten entirely. "The work will take about 2 weeks, weather permitting," Jake continued, seemingly unaware of her emotional struggle. "I charge fair wages, and I can start as soon as you'd like." I'll be camping down by the creek if that suits you, though I'd be grateful for well water and maybe a hot meal now and again if it's not too much trouble." Martha wiped her eyes quickly and turned back to face him, surprised to find him looking at her with understanding rather than pity. "You can start tomorrow if you're ready, Mr. Sullivan. I'll have breakfast ready at sunrise and supper when the work's done. There's a wash basin on the back porch and clean towels in the kitchen." The words came out in a rush, as if she needed to establish the practical boundaries of their arrangement before her heart could suggest something more dangerous. "I appreciate your kindness, Mrs. Cartwright. I'll do right by you and this place. You have my word." Jake's promise carried the weight of a man who understood that his reputation lived and died by the quality of his work, but something in his tone suggested he was promising more than just fence repair. As he walked back toward his horse, Martha found herself watching the confident set of his shoulders and the easy way he moved, realizing with a start that she was noticing things about a man she had no business noticing. The thought sent a flutter of panic through her chest, quickly followed by a stab of guilt so sharp it took her breath away. Jake's first day of work began before dawn, the sound of his hammer ringing across the prairie like a bell calling the homestead back to life. From her kitchen window, Martha watched him work with the steady rhythm of a man who had found his calling, his movements efficient and purposeful as he set new posts and strung fresh wire. She found herself timing her chores to coincide with views of the repair work, telling herself it was only natural to keep an eye on a stranger working her land. When she brought him water at mid-morning, she lingered longer than necessary, drawn by the easy way he answered her questions about the work and his stories of other ranches where he had mended more than just fences. He told her about the Johnson place down near Silver Creek, where a widow had hired him to repair storm damage and ended up discovering that her late husband had hidden a small fortune in gold coins inside the fence posts, a secret that secured her future and her children's education. "Seems like fence work has a way of revealing hidden treasures," he said with a grin that made Martha's stomach flutter in a way she hadn't felt since her courting days with Thomas. "Sometimes it's gold, sometimes it's good soil that's been waiting for the right care, and sometimes it's just the satisfaction of seeing something broken made whole again." Martha felt her cheeks warm at the intensity of his gaze, and she quickly excused herself to return to her household tasks. But throughout the day, she found her attention drawn to the window, watching Jake work shirtless in the afternoon heat, his skin bronzed by years under the sun and marked with the small scars that came from a lifetime of honest labor. The sight stirred feelings she had thought buried with Thomas, guilt and longing warring in her chest, until she forced herself to focus on mending clothes and planning meals. At supper that evening, Jake regaled her with stories of his travels across the territory, painting vivid pictures of boom towns and ghost towns, cattle drives and Indian raids, mining camps and railroad construction, that made Martha realize how small her world had become since Thomas's death. His laughter was rich and genuine, filling the silence that had echoed in her kitchen for so long that she had forgotten how empty it sounded. "You've seen so much of the country," she said, serving him a second helping of the beef stew that Thomas had always praised. "Don't you ever want to settle down in one place?" Jake paused with his fork halfway to his mouth, his expression growing thoughtful. "I reckon I've been looking for the right place to call home," he said finally. "It's not so much about the land, though that matters. It's about finding somewhere that feels like it needs you as much as you need it." His eyes met hers across the simple wooden table, and Martha felt something shift in her chest, like ice beginning to crack after a long winter. That night, as she lay in the bed she had shared with Thomas, Martha stared at the ceiling and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of another person sleeping on her property. Jake's bedroll was spread beside a small campfire down by the creek, but somehow his presence seemed to fill the entire homestead with a warmth she had forgotten was possible. For the first time in 3 years, the silence didn't feel like an accusation. The second week of Jake's work brought unexpected rain that drummed against Martha's roof and turned the repair work into a muddy challenge that tested both his skill and his humor. Rather than curse the weather as Thomas might have done, Jake embraced the complications with good-natured persistence, turning the setbacks into opportunities for storytelling as they waited out the worst downpours in Martha's kitchen. "Rain's just nature's way of testing whether you really want something," he said, accepting a cup of coffee and settling into the chair that had been Thomas's place at the table. "I once helped a family near Cheyenne rebuild their entire barn in weather like this. Took twice as long as it should have, but when we finished, that barn was so solid, it's probably still standing today." His stories always seemed to have lessons hidden in them, gentle suggestions that persistence and patience could overcome any obstacle. Martha found herself sharing stories of her own life for the first time since Thomas's funeral, talking about the early days of their homestead when everything had seemed possible, and the future stretched ahead like a golden promise. She told Jake about the garden she had planted their first spring, how the vegetables had grown so well that they had shared the bounty with neighbors for miles around, and how Thomas had built her a little greenhouse so she could start seeds early each year. "Sounds like you have a gift with growing things," Jake observed, looking out the rain-streaked window toward the neglected garden plot, where weeds now grew taller than the fence posts. It'd be a shame to let that talent go to waste. There was no judgment in his voice, only the gentle suggestion that perhaps some things deserved a second chance to bloom. As the rain continued, their conversation drifted to deeper topics, the kind of talk that happens when people are trapped together by weather and find themselves sharing more than they intended. Martha spoke about the loneliness that had settled over her like dust after Thomas's death, how the silence had grown so heavy that she sometimes talked to his photograph just to hear a human voice, even if it was only her own. Jake listened with the attention of a man who understood that sometimes being heard was more valuable than being advised, and when she finished, he shared his own story of loss. His wife and young daughter had died of cholera during his early cowboying days, a tragedy that had sent him wandering the frontier for years, looking for a place where the memories wouldn't follow him home every night. "Grief's a strange thing," he said quietly, watching the rain cascade past the window. "You think it's going to kill you at first, and then you think it's going to last forever, and then one day you realize it's changed into something else entirely. Not gone, but different. Like a scar that stops hurting but never quite disappears." Martha felt tears sliding down her cheeks, not the bitter tears of self-pity she had shed so often in the past 3 years, but the cleansing tears of recognition, of finally being understood by someone who had walked the same dark valley. When Jake reached across the table and gently covered her hand with his own, she didn't pull away, finding comfort in the simple human contact she had denied herself for so long. The rain continued through the night, and for the first time since Thomas's death, Martha fell asleep to the sound of another person's presence in her home. Jake, having accepted her invitation to sleep on the kitchen floor rather than in his soggy bedroll by the creek, the morning after the rain brought crystalline air and a landscape washed clean. Every blade of grass jeweled with droplets that caught the early sunlight like scattered diamonds. Martha woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, realizing with a start that Jake had risen before her and started breakfast, moving quietly through her kitchen with the consideration of a man accustomed to sharing space without imposing on it. "Hope you don't mind," he said when she appeared in her robe and slippers, her hair loose around her shoulders in a way that made her suddenly self-conscious. "I figured after you fed me so well these past days, the least I could do was return the favor." His smile was warm but respectful, acknowledging the intimacy of the moment without making her feel exposed or uncomfortable. As they shared breakfast in the golden morning light streaming through her kitchen windows, Martha realized that something fundamental had shifted between them during their rain-trapped conversations. The careful politeness of employer and hired hand had evolved into something deeper, a friendship built on shared understanding and mutual respect that felt as natural as breathing. When they returned to the fence work, their collaboration took on a new rhythm, Martha finding herself helping with tasks she would have watched from afar just days before. She held posts steady while Jake secured them, handed him tools with the anticipation that comes from watching someone work long enough to predict their needs, and found herself laughing at his stories with a freedom she had forgotten she possessed. "You're a natural at this," Jake commented as Martha helped him stretch a particularly stubborn section of wire. "Have you always been so handy with repair work?" "Thomas taught me," she replied, surprised to find she could speak her husband's name without the usual stab of pain. "He said a frontier wife needed to know how to fix things because the nearest help might be days away." As she spoke, she realized she was remembering Thomas with fondness rather than desperate longing, his memory becoming a warm part of her past rather than a cage that trapped her in grief. By mid-afternoon, they had completed the most challenging section of fence repair, and Jake stepped back to survey their work with the satisfaction of a craftsman who knew he had done good work. "Your Thomas would be proud," he said simply, and Martha felt her heart swell with an emotion that was part gratitude, part healing, and part something entirely new. That evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, Martha found herself studying Jake's profile and wondering what it would be like to have such company every evening. The thought no longer filled her with guilt, but with a tentative hope that surprised her with its strength. "The fence will be finished tomorrow," Jake said quietly, and Martha's heart clenched at the reminder that their time together was coming to an end. "What will you do then?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual despite the tightness in her throat. Jake was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the setting sun was painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "I reckon that depends," he said finally, turning to meet her eyes with an expression that made her breath catch. "On what?" "On whether you think this old cowboy might have found the place he's been looking for." Martha's heart hammered against her ribs as Jake's words hung in the evening air between them, carrying implications that both terrified and thrilled her. She had spent 3 years building walls around her heart, convincing herself that love was a luxury she could never afford again, that the pain of loss was too great a price to pay for the joy of connection. But Jake's presence had slowly dismantled those barriers with his gentle humor, his patient understanding, and his unwavering respect for both her grief and her strength. "Jake, she began, her voice barely a whisper as she struggled to find words for feelings that seemed too large and complex for language. "I never thought I could feel this way again. I never wanted to feel this way again." He leaned forward in his chair, close enough that she could see the sincerity in his blue eyes, the hope and fear warring in his expression. "Martha, I know you loved Thomas, and I would never try to replace what you had with him. But maybe, just maybe, there's room in your heart for something different, something new that doesn't take away from what came before but adds to it." The wisdom in his words struck her like lightning, illuminating a truth she had never considered. She had been treating love like a finite resource, as if caring for someone new would somehow diminish what she had shared with Thomas. But Jake was suggesting something revolutionary, that the heart could expand rather than replace, that new love could coexist with cherished memories rather than competing with them. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words tumbling out with the force of 3 years' worth of suppressed emotion. "I'm scared of losing someone again, scared of being happy only to have it torn away, scared of betraying Thomas's memory, scared of not being enough for someone as good as you." Jake reached for her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt both thrilling and comforting. "Fear's natural, Martha. I'm scared too. Scared I'm not worthy of a woman as strong and beautiful as you. Scared I'll say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing and lose the best thing that's happened to me in 20 years. His voice cracked slightly on the last words, revealing his own vulnerability in a way that made Martha's chest ache with tenderness. "You think I'm strong?" she asked, genuinely surprised. She had felt so weak for so long, so broken and fragile, that some days she wondered how she managed to get out of bed. "Martha, you've kept this homestead running for 3 years on your own. You've faced down loneliness and grief and kept going when lesser people would have given up. You've got a strength that goes bone deep, and it's one of the things I love most about you." The word love slipped out so naturally that it took them both by surprise, hanging in the air like a butterfly that had landed unexpectedly between them. Martha felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in years, they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling foreign and wonderful on her tongue. "God help me, Jake Sullivan, but I love you too." When he leaned forward to kiss her, it was with a tenderness that acknowledged all she had been through, all she had lost, and all she was willing to risk again. The kiss tasted like hope and possibility, like morning coffee and evening stars, like the promise of shared tomorrows that might be even sweeter for having been earned through hardship. The final day of fence work took on a bittersweet quality as Martha and Jake completed the last section of repairs, both aware that the project's end would force them to make decisions about their future that could no longer be postponed. They worked with unusual quiet, each lost in their own thoughts about the enormous step they were contemplating, the courage it would require to choose love over safety, hope over fear. When Jake secured the final post and stepped back to survey their completed work, Martha felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with the fence itself and everything to do with what they had built together over the past 2 weeks. The barrier that now surrounded her property was stronger and more beautiful than anything Thomas had ever constructed, not because Jake was a better craftsman, but because it had been built with shared purpose and growing affection. "It's perfect," she said, running her hand along the smooth top rail and marveling at the straight lines and secure joints that would protect her land for decades to come. "We make a good team," Jake replied, his use of the present tense rather than the past making Martha's heart skip with possibility. That evening, they prepared dinner together in Martha's kitchen with the comfortable choreography of people who had learned each other's rhythms. Jake washing vegetables while Martha seasoned the meat, both moving around the small space with an ease that spoke of natural compatibility. The simple domesticity of the scene filled Martha with a warmth that had nothing to do with the heat from the stove. "Jake, what would happen if you stayed?" she asked as they sat down to eat, her voice trembling slightly with the enormity of the question. He set down his fork and looked at her with the serious expression she had come to recognize when he was weighing his words carefully. "If I stayed, I'd want to do this right, Martha. I'd want to court you proper, give you time to be sure this is what you want. I'd get work with the surrounding ranches to support myself, and maybe eventually, if you'd have me, I'd ask you to be my wife." The word wife sent a thrill of terror and joy through Martha's system, evoking memories of her wedding day with Thomas, while simultaneously opening up vistas of an entirely different but equally precious future with Jake. "What about children?" she asked, knowing at 42 that her childbearing years were likely behind her, a source of deep regret that she had never been able to give Thomas the sons he had dreamed of. "I'd love any children we were blessed with," Jake said gently. "But Martha, I'm not looking for a broodmare or a housekeeper. I'm looking for a partner, someone to share life's joys and sorrows with, someone to grow old alongside. If God sees fit to give us children, that would be a gift. If not, we'll make our own kind of family." His words dissolved the last of Martha's reservations, replacing them with a fierce certainty that this man, this unexpected gift from a universe she had thought had forgotten her entirely, was worth any risk. "Then stay," she said, reaching across the table to take his hand. "Stay and court me proper, Jake Sullivan. Stay and see if we can build something as strong and lasting as that fence." Jake's answering smile was radiant, transforming his weathered features with joy so pure it took Martha's breath away. When he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, she felt as if her heart might burst with happiness she had never expected to feel again. Outside, a storm was building on the horizon, dark clouds gathering with the promise of rain that would test their newly completed fence. But inside Martha's kitchen, surrounded by the warmth of cooking food and the glow of lamplight and the presence of a man who loved her exactly as she was, Martha felt safer and more hopeful than she had since Thomas's death. The storm that had been threatening all evening finally broke just after midnight, bringing with it not just rain and wind, but something far more dangerous. A band of 6 Lakota warriors seeking shelter and medical attention for their wounded companion. Martha woke to the sound of Jake's voice calling her name urgently from the front porch, where he had been keeping watch over the property as the storm intensified. "Martha, I need you to stay calm and listen carefully." Jake's voice carried through the kitchen door, steady but tense. "There are some Indian folks here, and one of them's hurt bad. They're not looking for trouble, just help, but I wanted you to know before I brought them inside." Martha's heart raced as she quickly dressed and lit a lamp, her mind flooding with stories she had heard of raids and massacres, but also remembering Thomas's tales of peaceful encounters with native peoples who were simply trying to survive in a world that was changing too fast for anyone to keep up with. When she opened the door, she found Jake standing protectively between her and a group of men whose desperate faces were illuminated by lightning flashes. The wounded warrior was barely conscious, supported between 2 of his companions, blood seeping through a makeshift bandage on his shoulder where a bullet had torn through muscle and sinew. His face was ashen beneath his weathered skin, and his breathing came in shallow gasps that spoke of serious blood loss and possible infection. Despite her fear, Martha felt her nurturing instincts override her caution as she recognized suffering that transcended racial boundaries. "Bring him inside," she said without hesitation, stepping back to clear a path to her kitchen table. "Jake, help me clear this off so we can lay him down. I'll need hot water and clean cloths, and there's whiskey in the pantry for cleaning the wound." The leader of the group, a dignified man with silver streaking his long black hair, spoke to Jake in halting English mixed with gestures and his own language, clearly trying to explain their situation while expressing gratitude for the unexpected kindness of strangers. Jake's response, delivered in a mixture of English and sign language he had learned during his cowboy years, seemed to reassure the man that his companion would receive the best care possible. As Martha worked to clean and examine the wounded man's shoulder, she found herself remembering skills Thomas had taught her from his days as an army medic, a knowledge she had hoped never to need but was grateful to possess. The bullet had passed clean through, missing major arteries but tearing muscle that would take weeks to heal properly if infection didn't set in first. "He needs rest and clean dressings changed twice daily," she told the leader through Jake's translation. surprised by her own calmness in the face of circumstances that would have terrified her just hours before. "The fever should break by tomorrow if we keep the wound clean and get some broth into him." The gratitude in the old warrior's eyes transcended language barriers, and when he pressed something into Martha's hand, she looked down to see a beautifully carved piece of turquoise shaped like a small bird, a token of appreciation that clearly held significant meaning for its giver. The gesture moved her to tears, reminding her that kindness and humanity existed in all peoples, regardless of the color of their skin or the language they spoke. As the storm raged outside, Martha's small kitchen became a place of healing and unexpected fellowship, with Jake serving as translator while she tended to the wounded man, and the other warriors shared stories of their journey and their people's struggles to find safe passage through increasingly hostile territory. By dawn, the wounded warrior's fever had broken, and Martha woke to find him sitting up with assistance, accepting small sips of the beef broth she had prepared during the night. His color had improved dramatically, and though he was still weak, his eyes held the clarity of someone who would recover fully given proper care and time. The leader of the group, who had introduced himself as Standing Bear through Jake's translation, insisted on repaying Martha's kindness in a way that would change her life forever. Through gestures and broken English supplemented by Jake's interpretation, he explained that his people had been forced to flee their traditional hunting grounds due to pressure from white settlers and the army, but they had managed to save certain treasures that had been hidden in sacred places for generations. "He wants to show you something," Jake translated as Standing Bear, beckoned Martha to follow him outside, where the morning sun was burning away the last remnants of the storm clouds. "He says his people believe that great kindness deserves great rewards, and that the spirits have guided them to someone worthy of a gift that has been waiting for the right hands to claim it." Standing Bear led them to a small grove of cottonwood trees near the creek where Jake had been camping, and with reverent care, he removed from his saddlebags a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. When he unfolded the covering, Martha gasped at the sight of the most beautiful necklace she had ever seen, a strand of turquoise and silver beads interspaced with nuggets of what appeared to be pure gold, clearly the work of master craftsmen from generations past. "This belonged to a chief's daughter many winters ago," Jake translated as Standing Bear spoke in his native tongue, his weathered hands holding the necklace with obvious reverence. "She wore it on her wedding day and passed it down through her family until the wars came and scattered her people. Standing Bear's grandmother saved it when their village was attacked, and it has been waiting for someone worthy to wear it again." Martha tried to protest that she couldn't accept such a valuable and meaningful gift, but Standing Bear's insistence, conveyed through Jake's translation and the old man's gestures, made it clear that refusing would be not only impolite but spiritually significant. "The necklace," he explained, "was meant to be worn by women who brought healing and hope to others, and Martha's kindness to his wounded companion had marked her as such a woman." As Standing Bear placed the necklace around Martha's throat with the solemnity of a sacred ceremony, she felt the weight of history and responsibility settling on her shoulders along with the beautiful ornament. The gold and turquoise seemed to warm against her skin, as if the jewelry itself recognized its rightful owner. "He says the gold alone is worth enough to secure your future for life," Jake translated, his voice filled with amazement. "But the real value is in the blessing it carries. He believes it will bring you happiness and prosperity for as long as you wear it." When the warriors prepared to leave later that morning, the wounded man able to travel with careful support, Standing Bear embraced both Martha and Jake with the dignity of a man saying goodbye to family rather than strangers. His parting words, translated by Jake, would echo in Martha's mind for years to come. "The spirits reward those who listen to their hearts and act with courage. Your kindness to strangers has revealed the goodness of your souls, and your love for each other will be blessed with many years of joy." As they watched the group disappear into the distance, Martha fingered the precious necklace at her throat and realized that her act of compassion had not only saved a man's life, but had secured her financial future in a way that would allow her and Jake to build their life together, without the constant worry about money that plagued so many frontier families. 6 months later, Martha stood in the same kitchen where she had first served Jake breakfast, but now, it was transformed into the heart of a thriving homestead that bore the touches of both their dreams. The financial security provided by the gold in Standing Bear's gift had allowed them to expand the property, purchase quality livestock, and plant the large garden that had been Martha's secret ambition for years. The wedding had been simple but deeply meaningful, held in the parlor of their home with the circuit preacher officiating and their nearest neighbors serving as witnesses. Martha had worn Thomas's mother's dress, altered to fit her figure, but around her neck she proudly displayed the turquoise and gold necklace that had become a symbol not just of material prosperity, but of the unexpected ways that kindness could transform lives. Jake had proven to be everything Martha had hoped and more, a partner who honored Thomas's memory while building something entirely new and precious with her. He had used his knowledge of ranching to establish relationships with neighboring properties, quickly becoming known throughout the territory as a man whose word was his bond and whose skills were worth any price. On this particular morning, as Martha prepared breakfast for Jake and the 3 ranch hands they now employed, she paused to look out the window at the fence that had brought them together. It stood straight and strong, a testament to quality workmanship but also a symbol of the boundaries that protected their happiness while remaining open to the possibilities that each new day might bring. "You're smiling," Jake observed as he entered the kitchen, already dressed for a day of checking cattle in the far pastures. "What's got you so happy this early in the morning?" Martha turned to face her husband, still amazed at how natural that word felt on her tongue after months of marriage, and gestured toward the window where the morning sun was painting their land in shades of gold and green. "I was just thinking about how much can change in such a short time. A year ago, I thought my life was over, that I would spend my remaining years just existing. And now?" Jake prompted, moving close enough to wrap his arms around her waist, his touch still sending little thrills through her system even after months of marriage. "And now I wake up every morning grateful for the gift of another day, another chance to love and be loved, another opportunity to see what wonderful surprises life might bring." Martha leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of his presence and marveling at how completely her heart had healed from its brokenness. Jake pressed a kiss to the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair and the aroma of coffee and bacon that made their kitchen smell like home. "Funny how a broken fence can lead to so many blessings," he murmured. "Makes a man believe in providence, in the idea that everything happens for a reason we might not understand until later." As they stood together in the golden morning light, surrounded by the evidence of their shared prosperity and happiness, Martha fingered the turquoise necklace at her throat and thought of Standing Bear's words about the spirits rewarding those who acted with courage and kindness. She had taken a chance on Jake, opened her heart to love again despite her fears, and shown compassion to strangers who needed help, and in return, the universe had given her more joy and security than she had ever dared to dream possible. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention to the window, where they could see a lone rider approaching at an easy pace, just as Jake had done almost exactly 1 year earlier. But this time, instead of filling Martha with wariness, the sight filled her with curiosity and welcome, because she had learned that sometimes the most unexpected arrivals brought the greatest gifts. "Looks like someone might need help," Jake observed, reaching for his hat. "Then we'd better see what we can do," Martha replied, her voice filled with the confidence of a woman who had discovered that kindness was never wasted, and that love, once found again, it could illuminate even the darkest corners of the world. As they walked hand in hand toward their front porch to greet their unexpected visitor, the turquoise necklace caught the morning sunlight and seemed to glow with its own inner fire, a reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures in life came not from what we accumulated, but from what we were willing to give away. The heart that had learned to heal had also learned to hope, and Martha Cartwright Sullivan faced each new day with the joyful certainty that the best chapters of her story were still being written, one act of love and kindness at a time.